Whenever I approach an interpretation of the book of Revelation, I believe I understand a bit more what Job must have felt. Immersed in a field of incomprehensible terror and horror, I attempt to find some meaning in it, only to be surrounded by advisors and commentaries who tell me this thing and that, few of whom seem to agree, and fewer still making any reasonable sense. Job, knowing this same confusion, disregarded these speculative theologians and turned to God for the answer. Like Job, if we are to make any sense of this book, we must return to the source, to the vision or the dream itself, which we call the apocalypse. To say dream here is quite reasonable. In the Old Testament, there is no clear distinction between a dream and a vision, such as there is in our thinking. In our thinking, visions are often taken as more real than dreams, merely because visions, by our definition, arise during waking consciousness. Since in recent times we have degraded the unconscious, the contents of the unconscious are likewise degraded. And due to this, the dream is often dismissed and disregarded. How often have we said to ourselves and others, "It was merely a dream"? In the Old Testament, this distinction is missing. So it is that we can hear from King David that he pondered the visions of the night, the dream. There are certain dreams and visions that we do take more concretely than others. There is a sense and experience of the visionary dreamer that is distinguishable, allowing us to know when to interpret an experience in a fairly concrete, literal manner, in distinction to a symbolic interpretation. I related that distinction in detail in the work Revelations and Possession, and will not take time here to pursue that line of thinking. Rather, trust me that we would be correct in approaching the book of Revelation in a more symbolic manner than in attempting to take all that has in it literally. We would do well to approach it as it is, a dream. In this manner, we may be able to come to some clearer understanding of what John experienced. Like Job, we need to bypass the convoluted explanations arising from preconceived opinions and theologies and return to John's experience, as Job returned to God. In this manner, we will investigate the book of Revelation. Imagine the Apostle John walked into a psychotherapy consulting room, sat down, and related a troubling dream he had recently experienced. How would we then deal with him? Most likely, seeing the potency of the dream, we would begin a dream analysis. Typically, to understand a dream, we must see that it is not some confusion of images, but that it is most often coherently organized as a story. To view it as a story is convenient. However, many a dream may be better seen as a poem. Most laypersons have difficulty with poetry. We enjoy poems that seem easy to comprehend, but so many are just the opposite. Most poets compose their works using images and phrasing that leaves us initially scratching our heads in bewilderment. However, the poet has composed a work that has a meaning, one that can be seen as we flow through the poem from beginning to middle to end. Likewise, the dream is to be seen as such a poem. just such a story, told in a manner strange to our linear, logical way of speaking. To understand a dream, we look toward it as we would to any other story, a story which has a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. The beginning often sets the stage, giving us the context and the setting, as well as introducing the primary characters. Then the story unfolds, and we observe the process of moving toward a climax and a conclusion. The climax and conclusion often then reveal to us both the meaning of the story, the point we are to gather from it, as well as the method of moving toward realizing that meaning. As much as seeing it in the form of a story or poem, we can further understand it as a classical drama. For those familiar with dramatic structure, it too initially presents the setting and the protagonists, followed by the development of the plot, leading to the culmination or climax, and finally the resolution. Likewise, we can observe in the dream such a drama, such a statement of setting and protagonists, development of the story, and the third climactic stage, which culminates in a resolution. For example, take Shakespeare's King Lear. Here we have a story which begins with a king who, wishing to test his daughter's love and loyalty, divides his kingdom amongst them. The story then develops with treachery and suffering, and climaxes with a deep suffering of Lear's daughter, who is true of heart, but is unrecognized by her father because of his own actions and desire for power, which have blinded him. The character of the fool within the play becomes the purveyor of wisdom, as he concludes the story with the assertion, "It is sad when one grows old before one grows wise." We see the context of the story as a family in which power and greed are the guiding principles. The main characters are the father and his daughter. The outcome is suffering and disaster, where true love and loyalty are unrecognized. The process of the story is one where we see love manipulated in the service of greed and power. Knowing the end, we can then understand the beginning and the middle. The end tells us that we are in need of wisdom, because the unwise path leads to despair, destruction, and loss of love and trust. What is that unwise path? To test another's love, to place power and accusation of things over love and trust of the beloved. So it is that the playgoer now can walk away from King Lear with the message, trust those you love and trust their love. Do not test it, and value love above all things. Now, King Lear, even though recited in archaic yet beautiful language, is still more comprehensible than the average dream. Even so, the process of interpretation is much the same. So, here we have the Apostle John sitting before us in our consultation room, waiting for us to help him with his disturbing dream. The first thing that we would do is to ask him to tell us the whole dream, as best as he can remember. John begins, telling us that on a certain Sunday, while he was living the life of an exile on the island of Patmos, not far off the coast from his adopted hometown of Ephesus, in Turkey, he fell into a trance and had a dream that he heard a voice telling him to write down what he was about to experience, and then send it to 7 churches. He then tells us how he saw a heavenly scene with Christ clothed with the attributes of deity, standing in the midst of 7 lampstands, holding 7 stars. With this, we are given our initial context. We have the setting and the principal characters. The setting is heavenly, and so we already know that this is a transcendent message. It is not just about mundane, everyday life. Many of our dreams relate to questions and concerns that relate to living our daily lives well. This one relates to the deeper inner life, the life of the spirit, the transcendent life. The principal characters are John himself and the resurrection and glorified Jesus and the 7 churches. When a person is himself represented in a dream, this image most often relates to the conscious identity or the ego. We will speak more about this identity or ego at another opportunity. But now let's go on with John. For John then goes on to relate the story of how he received specific insights for each of these churches. And after this, he realized that it was as if he had been previously in the anteroom of the 3rd heaven. For now he sees a door above him open up, and he's called higher or deeper into a deeper or higher aspect of heaven. There he witnesses the heavenly liturgy before the magnificent throne of God. He tells of watching living creatures and angels as they call forth and produce terrifying events on the earth. This relating of horror upon horror continues building to a crescendo with a scene of final judgment and the end of the world as he knows it. Then, as we are about to be out of breath from this climax, we sigh with awe and relief as he encounters the resolution as a new heaven and a new earth and a beautiful heavenly city are presented, and all ends well. At this point, we will need to begin to make sense of the material for him. The first step in any dream interpretation is to set aside preconceptions and previously held opinions. To interpret a dream, one must commence with the idea that I have no idea what this means. If we are at all honest with ourselves, this should be a rather easy task with the book of Revelation. However, in other situations, we often proceed as if we know what is going on, and this is a disastrous mistake. Dreams and visions come to us to shake us up and to enlarge our present conscious position. To impose the present conscious position on the dream is to negate its very purpose. John did not have this vision because he already knew what was to happen, but because rather he did not know. Too often, the book of Revelation is taken as a document where John is seeming to put into code language a conscious communication of the problems to come, as if hiding it from the uninitiated. However, this then calls this description of the book of Revelation as a vision a lie. For in that case, it is not a vision, but merely a coded language of a consciously produced story. Or, we sometimes take the book of Revelation and read it in the more Freudian manner, where dreams are seen as attempting to hide from the ego their very meaning. In a caricature of that approach, every long object would then be seen as a phallic symbol representing repressed sexuality. Yet why would we approach a dream, especially John's dream, in such a manner? Would we really assume that Jesus is coming to deliver a message to John, only then to hide that very meaning from him in the most obscure manner? To think in such a manner appears rather convoluted and unnecessary. Rather, the dream is attempting to get a message across to the dreamer in as accurate a manner as it can. I often think of dreams as a game of charades. The dream presents images and events in the manner of saying, "It is as if," and then it delivers the message. Because of this, it is important for us to not assume that each image and event has a predetermined meaning that we already know. It is for this reason that dream dictionaries are, if not useless, are at least of minimal use. What we need to understand is that what each image and event means, first off, to John, is what is important. Even when the image or event has a seemingly general or common mythological theme, John's understanding and association of these very images and events is of what is of primary importance. It is John's dream, not mine. And it is John that the game of charades is playing with. After this, we may want to understand where the dream is pointing. When we looked at King Lear, we observed that when we finally understood the end, we can incorporate the action into a meaningful whole. It will be the same in interpreting the book of Revelation. When we comprehend the meaning toward which it points, we will be better able to gain a coherent understanding of the process represented in the symbols and images of the seals, trumpets, bowls of wrath, and the like. This understanding of the end, in order to grasp the process, is of utmost importance in our interpretation. This is similar to reading the last chapter of a murder mystery and discovering the murderer prior to reading the rest of the book. Or it is like being told that the protagonist in the film The Sixth Sense was a ghost prior to watching the film. Some may call this unfair, reading or knowing the end prior to experiencing the beginning. It does remove the excitement of our story. However, we are not approaching the book of Revelation as an exciting mystery, but we want to know what it means. To know the who in the whodunit, or the fact that the character in The Sixth Sense was a ghost, allows us to understand the events in the preceding portions of the story in a more coherent, if less exciting, a manner. Understanding the interpretation of the meaning of this book is complicated by the fact that many of us live in a confused state. We do not live by a coherent philosophy of life. We declare that we are headed for heaven, or are at least hopeful that we are, and that this is what guides our life. Yet, we otherwise act as if we are determined by our past. Our confusion arises because these two philosophies dominate our lives yet contradict each other. The Christian view has always been defined by the prospective, teleological, or finality view of life. In that case, life is determined by the future destiny of the individual, we see this in a simple yet complex an example as the acorn. The acorn is only an acorn because within it is the potential reality of the oak tree, which will one day become manifest. The acorn is not defined or guided by some push from behind, but by a destiny it is to fulfill in the future. Our intellectual infatuation with classical Darwinianism and classical Darwinian thinking has us believing that everything is determined by past events, in which case we are determined by past fate rather than by future destiny. We must make a choice which philosophy best fits reality if we are to move out of the confusion in which we now live. The Christian message is one that unfolds and holds forth the image of a God who is a shepherd. To the agrarian society, this image is clear. The shepherd walks before the flock, and the sheep follow behind. The pillar of fire and cloud experienced on the Hebrew Exodus went before them. It did not drive them from behind. These images and more have defined the Judeo-Christian understanding as well as have been rife throughout most of the world's mythologies, and so inform us of the most reasonable, if not presently liked, understanding of the motive force of life. Life is defined by destiny. The destiny that is portrayed in John's dream is one of union, consummation, and wholeness. It is of entry into a life beyond division, where earth and heaven are not divided, where human beings and God are no longer separate, but are so close that it would take the very sword of the Spirit to divide between them as between bone and marrow. So now, let us take a deeper look at just what this destiny entails.